All right, let's look at Mark 8. This was the way of the cross. We covered that. And then at the end of that, Jesus says in verse 38, if anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Shame was a very important aspect of their culture, of that society in those days. Shame or honor was more important to them than wealth. They would live in order to gain honor. They would have these arguments that Jesus had with the Pharisees were honor battles. And who was going to get the most honor out of this? And of course, Pharisees lost. They would ask him a question, a challenge, and he would be able to respond in such a way that they were speechless, and then they would lose face. They would kind of be ashamed. So, and Paul does some of that too, like in Corinthians, there's some struggle there for shame and honor, and Paul takes a kind of a backwards tack to it, and he says, I will brag about how poor I am, about all the difficulties I've had. So he was able to kind of, in a reverse way, brag about things that they didn't like, but he thought that were commendable. But anyway, it's here Jesus is referring to this, and he's referring to the value they have, but they should not be ashamed of him. They should be allied, loyal to him, and not only to him, but also to his words. And by adulterous and sinful generation, you know, his generation wasn't any worse than others, but it's a typical way of describing just this age, in this age. Then the Son of Man will be ashamed of those people. That could include Peter. Now, Peter was ashamed of Jesus and his words. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So what Jesus is saying here, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he comes. This is not a permanent situation. It can be changed. You know, if we have moments of shame, when we are ashamed of Jesus, when we shrink back, when we're afraid to admit that we follow Jesus, those are all forgivable sins, and we can be back in Jesus' good graces again. What happens when he comes in his Father glory with the holy angels? You know, if he's still ashamed of a person, Mark isn't saying, Jesus doesn't really say here either. That's kind of alluding to something, to the judgment, without really saying exactly what the results of that judgment are. It's like he's saying, well, if you don't want to be associated with me, well, you have to be. The Revelation describes it as the gates are open, but some people are still outside. They don't want to come in. But all of those are metaphors for future judgment, and what it's really going to look like. That's much harder to nail down. What does it mean to be ashamed? You know, how would Jesus be ashamed of a person? It's not like shame in the way in the kind of emotion that we would normally have. Normally, when we are ashamed, we're ashamed of something we have done. But yeah, Jesus is referring to us being ashamed of being associated with someone else. You know, here Peter was ashamed of being associated with Jesus. And then Jesus could be, well, shame just doesn't seem the right word, but it's, you know, the English or Greek didn't have a better word for it. That, you know, he would say, okay, you know, if you don't want to be associated, I'm not going to press myself on you. That's my interpretation of what shame might mean in that context. Any comments from you? Okay.
Maybe ashamed. When you say ashamed, are
Yes.
you like embarrassed?
Yeah.
Embarrassed
Yeah, that embarrassed is kind of a synonym. You know, and so it's kind of odd that Jesus would be embarrassed of anyone, you know, even Judas, you know. Yeah, it's like the word does not make sense in connection with Jesus. But I just didn't, I don't have any others. Well, okay, the next verse is chapter 9 and verse 1. Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." And this is a prediction that some people won't die before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. So there's a couple of points there. Well, one is, what is this referring to? And all in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all of them connect this, have this verse in the same sequence. This verse and the very next verse is the transfiguration, where Jesus is transfigured before them on a high mountain. It seems that Jesus is here predicting that, okay, some of you aren't going to die until they see the kingdom come in glory and come with power. And this transfiguration of Jesus does demonstrate that the kingdom of God has come and has power. Not the same kind of power that will be shown when Jesus returns. Some people say, well, it's kind of an odd prediction that, you know, he would make a prediction. Well, some of you won't die in the next week. And actually, none of them did. Maybe Jesus didn't know exactly how long it would take, or maybe this is simply a figure of speech just to assure them that, yes, you know, you're going to see it. You're going to see it before you die. And yeah, it's some of you, not all. Now, all of the people, all of the disciples there, well, except for Judas, saw Jesus' resurrection. Doesn't seem, probably not referring to that. He seems to be referring to the transfiguration. But the commentators do have some arguments about whether this is really predicting the transfiguration or what. It's maybe a vague prophecy, but it reassures the disciples after he has just told them, look, you've got to take up your cross and be willing to die for me. He also reassures them, yes, before that, you know, before that happens, you know, at least all of you, some of you are going to see the kingdom in its power. Questions, comments on that verse? Kind of a little different one, but at least I think it's pointing to the transfiguration. So that's what we'll look at next. Verse 2, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. He was transfigured before them. And there I can take a look and see, well, where did this happen? Where is this high mountain? Mark doesn't name it. None of the gospel accounts name this high mountain. So there's a little bit of speculation as to where that might be. Here is a map of Galilee. And okay, figure. Okay, the traditional site is Mount Tabor. They're southwest of the Sea of Galilee. That's now the previous episode was up near around the villages of Caesarea Philippi, way up here. So some people say, well, the best candidate for it, the highest mountain in Israel, is right up there. It's Mount Hermon. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It is like 9,000 feet high, often snow-capped. It can be seen from a long ways off. Mount Tabor, the traditional Mount of Transfiguration. I mean, it's a distinctive mountain because it's only 2,000 feet high, but it's on a plain, so it just kind of sticks out as a lump on the plain. So it's a very notable mountain. And another possibility that they have is Mount Morone. That's just the third highest mountain. That's also in Galilee. It's upper Galilee, some area of pretty rugged terrain. Anyway, and of course, where this happened doesn't matter. It doesn't change the meaning of the Transfiguration at all. But those are three possible places. Like Mount Hermon up there, it's 9,000 feet high, but none of them say that Jesus went to the top of the mountain. He just took them up on the mountain. They have had to go all the way, but they do say it was a high mountain. So you can pick any of these could be considered high relative to the land around them. Okay, let's go back to the text. Okay, so they went up to a mountain where they were all alone, and he was transfigured before them. His clothes. Now, Mark doesn't tell us anything about how Jesus himself changed. Matthew and Luke say that his face became radiant. But Mark just says his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. So not only Jesus, but also his clothing was transfigured. And this episode of this transfiguration has several parallels with Moses on Mount Sinai. Of course, when Moses went up, his face was, he was transfigured, his face radiated light. And it also says Moses went up with three other persons. It names three, but then there were also 70 others, elders, who were also at least partway up the mountain. But there are three people named. So that's a couple of parallels. And it seems like, Mark is intentionally bringing out some of these parables. Of course, it's on a mountain, and people are frightened of this result. That's another thing that they have in common. God speaks from a cloud. So all of these things are shared between the two different stories. So there's a kind of an intentional parallel or comparison here of Jesus with Moses. Of course, and that comes out further with the next verse. There appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who was talking with Jesus. Well, why Elijah and Moses? What do they do? One theory is that Elijah represents the prophets, and Moses represents the law. Kind of represents two different parts of the Old Testament. Yeah, but Elijah didn't write anything. There's no book named Elijah. Described in the books of Kings, his activities, but he himself didn't write. He was a notable prophet, and he was also had his own of God on Mount Sinai. So both Elijah and Moses had some kind of connection with being on Mount Sinai and being transfigured, seeing God. Well, no, Elijah wasn't transfigured. They were both have connections to Sinai. So there's some possible connection there. But there's also in first century, there's a lot of speculation about Elijah. Some thought that Jesus might be Elijah come back. And so this vision, on this vision on the mountain would certainly put that rumor to rest. Well, there, look, there's one, there's the other. They're different people. But only Peter, James, and John would have seen that, and they weren't allowed to talk about it until later. So, I don't know. So it's not clear exactly why it was Elijah and Moses, but we can see some connections there as to possible significance for those two people. And they were talking with Jesus. Now, Luke says they were talking about his departure. His exodus is the Greek word, another connection with Moses. But Mark does not say what they were talking about. Just, it's kind of a very unreal vision happening. This, and of course, this is the way it's presented. This is a transfiguration. It is not, the disciples are seeing something that, like on a different level, a different plane, a different dimension of some reality, that they could see Jesus the way he really was. His clothes weren't normally that way, but at least on this occasion, the disciples could see him that there's a greater reality here than what they normally saw. And then Peter, this has got to be the dumbest statement that Peter has ever made. It's so dumb that Mark says he didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. He says, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here." He says, "Wow, you invited us." I have never seen anything like this before. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And Mark doesn't tell us what the significance, none of them tell us what the significance of these shelters could be. And again, the commentators kind of speculated what it might be. Maybe it's the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. But one thing I notice here is that they're only putting up 3 shelters when there's actually 6 people up there. There's Moses, Elijah, Jesus, and Peter, James, and John. There's 6 people. So why not have 6 shelters? Something like the shelters are special for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Maybe it's like a shrine, and that's one speculation. Kind of encouraging them to stay, perhaps. Look, you've got a place here. Stay. Let's have this vision last a little longer. But Peter really didn't know what he was talking about, but it's interesting that Mark tells us that Peter did know what that Peter's comments were nonsense, but includes them anyway, which suggests that he sees some kind of significance in what he was saying there.
Why do you think he referred to him as rabbi?
Yeah, that's also interesting. It is kind of an unusual way for him to talk about Jesus.
Yeah. Is that something they did for rabbis back then?
Well, they would talk to, they would ask a rabbi, they view him as a rabbi. The Aramaic word means great one, a great one. So it's a kind of an honorific title. After Peter has declared Jesus to be the Messiah, this rabbi is kind of an insult. This is way less than what he had said before. So again, he's kind of putting out things without really thinking them through. Maybe he was scared out of his wits. And then in verse 7, that cloud appeared, which the cloud representing God. A voice came from the cloud, This is my son whom I love. Listen to him. This is similar to what God had said to Jesus at his baptism, of course, but then he was talking directly to Jesus. You are my son whom I love. In this case, the voice is talking to Peter, James, and John, saying, this over here, this person is my son whom I love. Listen to him. And most commentators agree that there's an allusion here to Deuteronomy 18:15, where Moses is near the end of Moses' life. Moses is predicting that the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from among your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. Now, that was not viewed as a messianic prophecy by most Jews at the time, but it seems like that's pretty obvious that a Messiah should be in that category too. You must listen to him. A prophet like Moses, pretty great. But anyway, so here's God telling Peter, James, and John, you need to listen to Jesus. This kind of reaffirmation for them, for Peter, James, and John, would have been helpful after they have been told the bad news by Jesus that he's going to suffer and die, and that they're going to suffer too, have to be willing to die. They might well be wondering, well, then why are we following him? He's got this prophecy of doom, and we're going to follow him into it. But here, this vision or this voice is giving an affirmation that Jesus is really much greater than what you imagined. And this is my son. You need to listen to him, stick with him, and learn what he says, and not just learn what he says, but take it to heart and listen in the meaning of take heed, apply what he says, do what he says. And that would have scared them out of their wits too, I think. But eventually verse 8, they looked around and they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. So it's pretty clear that this divine voice was speaking about Jesus, that he is God's son, like no higher category than that could exist in Jewish thinking. And they're supposed to listen to him, follow him.
Like it's almost like Moses and Elijah are there, and God is saying, Jesus is my fulfillment of Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. Now, hear him, listen to him, and refocusing their Jewish mindsets to Jesus and only Jesus. It kind of seems that way, and it seems like the God just kind of interrupts Peter to save him from further putting his foot in his mouth.
Yeah, I like what you say there. He's the fulfillment of Moses and Elijah. Not fulfillment of a specific prophecy so much as fulfillment of the prototype that they were. He is more than they were put together. Anyone else? All right, verse 9. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So there's another command for secrecy that Mark has quite a bit of. And verse 10, they kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. Now, any Jew knew what rising from the dead meant. So there's something more going on here. Is that what are they discussing? They're probably discussing why it would be that there would be a resurrection before the end of history. before Jesus comes in, what we would call a second coming, before the kingdom comes in its fullness. That's when they expected the resurrection. They didn't have thinking for how someone would be raised from the dead in the middle of it, even though Jesus had raised people from the dead. It's kind of puzzling as to why they were, why were they discussing this? What its significance was. They may know quite well what it meant, but they didn't know its significance. How did this fit into the plan? Whether a timetable might have been their discussion. So in verse 11, they asked Jesus, why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? So this was just speculation in the first century that Elijah would return, and this is based on some prophecies in Malachi, which I include here in the box. Malachi says, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. And then next chapter, I will send you the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to the children, the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. So the Jews speculated what this Elijah figure would be, coming before the day of the Lord when the nation would be restored, as they thought it. So this messenger was associated with Elijah, and then Elijah would come, and then the Lord will come to his temple. So this was the speculation that was going about. And so the disciples asked Jesus, well, why do the teachers say that? If Elijah is coming and he restores everything, why would the Messiah need to suffer? That might be their question. But I look at this prophecy in Malachi, and it doesn't necessarily say that Elijah will be successful in that. He says, verse 6 says, he will turn the hearts of the parents to the children, hearts of the children to their parents, or else. So kind of an option there. Maybe this isn't going to work out. Maybe he's not going to be successful. God will come and strike the land with total destruction. And then so Jesus says, well, this Elijah is going to fail. The destruction will come, but I, as the Messiah, will accept that upon myself. He will accept the curses of the covenant as part of his sacrificial role on behalf of the nation. Now here we're having to speculate a lot because these statements from Jesus are not self-explanatory. we kind of wonder, well, what like the disciples were saying, what does this raising from the dead mean? What is its significance? So we can see what the words are, but we don't always know how they all fit together. So Jesus says, well, Elijah does come first, restores all things. Then he says, well, why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything that they wished, as it is written about him. And there we don't have anything. We don't know what was written about him in terms of a failure of the Elijah or a failure of John the Baptist. Was this Elijah predicted to fail? And obviously, they've done to him everything they wished. Jesus is saying, yes, they killed him. But actually, Jesus doesn't even tell us here that Elijah is to be identified with John the Baptist. That comes from somewhere else in the Gospels. But here in Mark, we're still operating kind of in a fog. Who is he talking about? We learned from other passages that John the Baptist did have the role of Elijah, but he was killed. So he was not able to turn the hearts of the parents to their children. And so he was, but yeah, we don't know where it was written that he would definitely fail. Malachi gives that as kind of a possibility, but if the Elijah figure failed, then it's no surprise that the Messiah figure would also be rejected and suffer much, as he says, and be killed. Any comments on that?
I have a question.
Okay.
So then when you were saying the Elijah figure might have, if I understood you right, that the Elijah figure might have been John the Baptist, and I thought his purpose was to announce the coming of Christ. And I'm wondering how that's connected with him. What does that mean to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents? Is that connected to what he came to do?
Well, that's why I asked for comments and not questions, because I can't answer questions. And I don't often remember where it says that John the Baptist was Elijah. What comes to mind is Matthew 11. I really don't know whether that's accurate.
Okay. But wherever it is, is it true that it was said that his purpose was to announce the coming of the Lord. He was to announce the ministry of Christ.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how that connects with, okay, I'll make it a comment. That doesn't seem to connect with him turning the hearts of the parents to their children, etc.
Yeah, that's prophecies are sometimes written in language that is figurative, and like what is this hearts of the parents to the children, children to the parents? Is that a metaphor, figure of speech for something else? And the example that comes to mind is when Isaiah predicted that mountains will be brought low and valleys would be brought high, and there'd be level ground, and there would be a highway in the desert. And Luke says John the Baptist fulfilled that.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't have any bulldozers.
Right.
He was moving mountains. There was a figures of speech there that really I would not expect. I would not have gotten that out of the prophecy except that Luke told me. Oh,
okay.
It was.
Could it be that he is the parent, Jesus, and we are his children, and therefore turn that around, that we have to also accept him, and if we don't, being totally destructive, in other words, we're no longer with him, then we're done. Could that be a prophecy like that?
Well, that's interesting. That's
Good as any, huh?
yeah. That's
But didn't Jesus come to reconcile us back to the Father?
yes, good point, Lee. Yes, he reconciled us. So he did turn at least the hearts of some of the children to the Father.
That was his purpose.
And in a way, then the Father's heart has always been toward us. God has always had a mind to rescue us from the predicament we got ourselves in.
But to turn the children's heart to the parents.
Yeah, that part of it. Yeah, that's Jesus did that part.
And I try to, whenever we have a Bible study, one of the things I do is try to put myself in the shoes of the characters. Like in this case, assuming I was one of the disciples. And while us already, this May the 5th, 2021, and some theologians too, they already find it difficult to understand these scriptures. I was thinking how much more the disciples at that time, who didn't really know much about theology, nor did they even understand the kingdom of God, as we discussed last time. They were hoping for the Roman Empire. And then Jesus tells them, I tell you this, that some of you who are still standing here, you will see the full force of the kingdom. And if I were a disciple, I'd say, oh, what is he talking about? Is he going to talk about now, the overthrow of the Roman Empire? I mean, I'm just trying to imagine this, how they process this, because we have the Apostle Paul, we have the epistles, we have Mike Morrison, we have all kinds of theologians, right? At that time, they didn't have any. And then he brings them to the transfiguration, shows Elijah, and then shows Moses. And then is this a vision of the future, or is this a reality of another dimension? I mean, even us, we struggle with this other dimension of space and time realities, and how much more these disciples, talks about the dead rising. I mean, there's so much information, and I just feel so sorry in some ways for the disciples, because they cannot really understand it. And I guess the lesson there is just stick around. Don't be impatient.
Right.
In time, God is going to reveal through His Spirit. He drops these seeds of information and this knowledge. While we may not fully understand now, just be patient. In time, maybe we won't even, but during the resurrection, we probably will. But anyways, this is just, so I was quiet. I was trying to process this. This is
So-
tough,
So is he referring to Mike?
But yeah. So that transfiguration alone is a big discussion. What is that? Is that a vision of the future, or is that a reality of another dimension that from God's perspective, there is such thing as no time? I mean, before Abraham was, I am, those language. But the disciples cannot comprehend that. I cannot. I mean, we struggle with all those. But I have faith that Jesus is my Savior. Period. That's good enough.
That's one point of stability. We can be sure on that. And the other things, maybe not so sure on.
Yeah.
Barbara, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to the scripture that you were referring to, is to come in the spirit and power of Elijah. And I think that's Luke 17, I believe.
Ah, okay.
There seems to be, Mike, some kind of urgency in a lot of these messages, like, hey, the kingdom is coming and you're still standing here. And then the Apostle Paul says, behold, right, we will rise up, assuming that it's their time when Jesus comes. And then in the book of Acts, these angels came to the disciples and says, just as you see Jesus rising up, you will see him coming down. And people listening, they say, oh, he's coming down during our lifetime. I mean, a lot of this, it doesn't really explain that actually it's not during their time, but it keeps quiet so that people will always have a sense of urgency. I think God didn't want us to say, them to think, hey, it's still 2,000 years from now, or you say, maybe now, your time. There's this urgency that I think God wants us to have. I mean, even when we die, that's already our time. Yeah. Anyways.
It will come at a time when you expect not.
Yeah.
So you get encouragement to do that study. I'll do a study on turning the hearts of the
Oh, okay. Great.
I have a more simple question. How did they even know it was Elijah and Moses? Because and it wasn't just like,
Well,
how did what?
The commentaries did comment on that.
I figured Jesus must have explained something because it would have been very bright and confusing, and you just two random guys.
Or they could have been, when they were talking with each other, they could have been using each other's names. But
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
one thing that in my own experience, in my dreams, I will know who a person is without seeing their face.
Mhm.
I mean, the dream tells me who it is. I recently had one of my father, and it was unusual because I did see his face, but that was part of the dream. I was seeing him as 40 years old, and yeah, it was kind of bizarre. Not quite as bizarre as this transfiguration, but it's kind of the way dreams work. There's an inner sense there of who that person is, and so I'm guessing in visions and in this transfiguration too, something like that could have been at work there. Yes, Cecilia.
I relate to what you said about the dream, and so what I was thinking is, I gave that up to Jesus. It was revealed to them who that was, and I was thinking Jesus had a purpose. There was a purpose for them having seeing that transfiguration. And maybe what crossed my mind was, it was an encouragement. What came to mind when we were reading through it was the emphasis that John has on that you may believe, that you may believe. And it's like, he knew he was about to be crucified. He knew the doubts that they had in their minds, and he was maybe encouraging them, possibly, giving them something to believe. Like similar, what Burmy was saying was, giving them something to hold on to when they have all these questions and there's so much they don't understand. And he's revealing all these things to him. So the transfiguration was possibly maybe a way of giving them hope and help and something to hold on to, because they didn't understand the reality of what he was saying. Right.
Yeah, I'm sure it was to give them some kind of encouragement, conviction, is to stick with it. And I thought of another thing that a way in which they could recognize who it was, and it's the way that people can recognize. You look at medieval art and recognize who the people are. Moses was kind of, they had a stereotype of Moses. He would be carrying tables of stone, and he would have horns on his head. The horns were from a mistranslation of the Latin version, but all the pictures of Moses have horns on the head. So if you see a picture that's not otherwise labeled, and somebody's got horns on his head and is holding pieces of stone, you know it's Moses.
Horns on his head?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Elijah could have been a bald man with the leather garment and some kind of stereotyped view or description of who he was. And then even if you had never seen him before, you would recognize who, if there was a costume party and someone dressed as Elijah and came in there, you would know who he was dressed as, because you had a legend about what he looked like. So that the disciples, that might be how they knew who these characters were.
Yeah, Jillian, I think the disciples recognized Moses because he looked like Charlton Heston. I thought they saw the movie. No.
That movie is so old.
Yeah, because it's ancient.
It's so old. The disciples were tired of it.
Yeah, and also Jillian, there's three of them, and Jesus told them, don't tell it to anybody, not yet, not until, all the resurrection and everything. So there are three witnesses. So this really happened, and not just one or two, but three. So they will not conflict each other. And as what Mike was saying, perhaps with Jesus Christ talking to them and mentioning their names, and then when the two are all gone, Jesus Christ did not even correct, hey, that's not Moses, it's David. No, it's just like, yeah, you're right, it's Moses and Elijah. So there's really, even they do not recognize, because they don't really have like photographs, like click, and then you're in Facebook pictures, but it's kind of like being affirmed by Jesus Christ that, yeah, I'm talking to the two. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Maybe it's like a vision and there's a caption under them, just Moses.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, like, okay, what?
Name tags there, caption for the hearing impaired.
Well, on the other hand, I'm thinking maybe Moses and Elijah didn't see the disciples, they being in the transfiguration. They only saw Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Because if I was Moses or Elijah and somebody called Jesus Rabbi, Rabbi I'll just correct him. Hey, you stupidant. He's not a real rabbi. He's the son of God. So anyway, so maybe they didn't see him too, because they didn't hear Peter. We don't know, but the other way around, maybe, yeah, they just saw Jesus.
Yeah. And how did they recognize Jesus?
Yeah, that's
Shining garment, white cloth.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. Well, were they really there, or was it just an appearance?
but at least we know that these two people, their bodies were not found. They're dead, but their bodies were not found. Moses?
Yeah, you're right. That is another point in which that they have in common. Yeah.
Yeah.
Taken up in a chariot. Moses, it does say he died, but they don't know where his body was.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a lot of questions there.
So, yeah, I don't know that people speculated. The people speculated that Elijah would come back, but I don't know that they speculated that Moses himself would. Somebody doing work like Moses. But anyway, they are. Enoch was another one who had a mysterious disappearance, but he wasn't here.
Interesting.
When it speaks about turning the hearts of the children to their parents and the children, and the parents to the children, could it be because in the times in which we live now, everybody, the hearts of people have turned, there's an unnatural affection. And of course, some parents don't love their kids the way they should. And vice versa. We're living in a time where kids disrespect their parents and their parents disrespect their kids. And, when it turns the hearts of the fathers to the children, then the fathers will have the parents will have a natural love for their children, and vice versa, the children have a natural love for their parents. Whereas nowadays, you don't always find that.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder, I was just kind of thinking, in Malachi's day, did they have a similar problem with that too? I don't know. Kind of disruptions in family things need to be restored. But yeah, there may be a literal need for that. I suspect there's also a spiritual meaning in there as well. But that's I don't have a clear crystal ball on that. Okay, so that's they've come down from the mountain, And after this event, then and Jesus heals another boy. He heals a boy with an impure spirit, it says. Now, Jesus doesn't do a lot of healings from this point on. So this is kind of an unusual one as well. But the focus of the story is, the way Mark is telling the story, he gives much more emphasis to teaching the disciples than to healings and miracles. But this is one miracle that he has. So let's take a look there in Mark 9 and verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, 9 of them, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. So it's interesting, the teachers of the law had come up there somewhere. Well, we last heard of them around in the vicinity of Caesarea Philippi, which is a Gentile area. It's possible that the teachers of the law went up there, but it's also possible that the group has moved in the meantime. Mark is not quite that clear on exactly geography at this point. So the teachers of the law were arguing with the disciples. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. And the question is, why were they overwhelmed with wonder? Is it that unusual to see Jesus come back? Usually Mark has people be overwhelmed with wonder or to be in awe, to marvel after a miracle. In this case, it's interesting, it's before a miracle. Jesus has just come down. Some think that, well, maybe Jesus' face is still shining and that's why they might be overwhelmed with wonder. But Mark doesn't tell us that. So that's kind of a mystery. That's the text. But they did run to greet him. They were not afraid of him like the Israelites were afraid of Moses. They ran to greet Jesus. It's like amazed to see him again. And he asks them in verse 16, what are you arguing with them about? And then this is kind of another puzzle too, and because their answer doesn't really give us an argument. There's no dispute here. Look, your disciples couldn't cast out the demon. What is there to argue about there? Anyway, they were having some kind of argument, maybe a verbal challenge. The teachers of the law were putting down the disciples. You guys were not able to do it, therefore, you're illegitimate. You're following a false teacher. We're not told the details on that. But a man in the crowd answered, verse 17, teacher, I brought you my son. I brought you, but Jesus wasn't there. He brought his son to the 9 disciples. And the son was possessed by a spirit that had robbed him of speech. Verse 18, whenever it seizes him, the spirit, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, becomes rigid. Symptoms of epilepsy. But Mark and the other writers know that there's a difference between epilepsy or sickness and demon possession. So in this case, the demon is imitating some aspects of epilepsy. One commentator speculated, the demon somehow had access to that part of the brain. But it's not just epilepsy, but also robs him of speech. So he was not able to speak. And so the man says, I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. And then Jesus has kind of a little, in verse 19, some couple rhetorical questions of exasperation. Oh, you unbelieving people. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? And I'll bring the boy to me. Of course, Jesus knew ahead of time that, that's why he came, because the people were unbelieving. They needed help. They needed a savior. So it's kind of odd that Jesus reflects, his, maybe it looked like impatience here, but he is at least commenting on the fact that, all the people around him are unbelieving. They are not trusting in God the way that he was telling them that they could.
So is Jesus saying that the people or whoever around him has the ability to throw out the demon?
I don't think he would say that, but at least the disciples should have been able to. He had sent them out earlier, and they had been able to perform, to heal, and to exorcise demons. So he's kind of sighing, well, yes, even my best students here aren't, learning all the lessons that I wish they would learn. Maybe that's.
But if you read it, it sounds like unbelieving generation, like all people.
Yeah, and everybody else too. I mean, the disciples are the people are no better than the disciples. Yeah, they're all together, and that they do not believe. If I think he is saying that, if you did believe, if they were a believing generation, then we wouldn't have this problem to start with, and they would be able to cast out the demons, evil spirits. But yeah, this is why he came. He's done many of these exorcisms and healings. So he's, all right, he'll do another.
Where's Moses and Elijah when you need them, huh? They're still on the mountain.
Yeah. 8 o'clock. Does anybody else have a comments for that? We can pick this the story up next week.
I think it's referring to the disciples, because that's what verse 18 says. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. So the object or the attention, the focus is on the disciples who were not able to exorcise the spirit. And of course, in exasperation, Jesus kind of speaks, like when Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," kind of, really upset. You and believing, kind of use that general term, but I think he was focusing and looking at the disciples for not being able to do that in faith.
I wondered if the tone, if he was responding to the tone of the person who was saying, we asked your disciples to do it, but they couldn't. It's almost like it depending on how that was said, I wondered if Jesus' response was more a response to, because he says this unbelieving generation, which is more than just the disciples. That's how I was reading.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, and it would tie in with the idea that they were arguing about something. They were having some kind of dispute. There was some animosity going on there between the teachers and the disciples, and so Jesus is expressing some frustration with that, with both sides of that argument. Well, okay, that's kind of an odd tone to end on. Jesus is frustrated. But he saves the day in the end, and we'll get to that next week.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
All right.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good
Bye,
night.
people.
God bless.
Bye.